As Vladimir Velminsky testifies in his study of the Soviet man, Homo Sovieticus, toward the end of 1989, the year that marked the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, inhabitants of the region could watch Anatoly Mikhailovich Kashpirovsky conducting a televised seance intended to calm the public and restore their faith in communism. However, this undertaking was not merely a reflection of the absurd ideas held by the system's architects overcome by panic during its twilight. Rather, it was the culmination of earlier research from which emerged the notion of brainwaves and the possibility of uploading and controlling thought, all of which was based on the idea of the psychon, a supposed biomagnetic medium, a carrier of information directed from the sender to the target. Had it succeeded, the project would have turned the dream of uninterrupted long-term planning, free from objective difficulties and subjective weaknesses, into a reality of controlled existence. As for the theoretical foundations, they were laid by a range of figures: the scientific management theorists Alexei Kapitonovich Gastev, circus trainer Vladimir Leonidovich Durov, neurologist Vladimir Mikhailovich Bechterev, electrical engineer Bernard Bernardovich Kaczynski, and psychological cybernetics researcher Pavel Ivanovich Gulyaev. These names may sound obscure to many, but even the basic investigation reveals that the project was, in fact, quite serious, at least when measured by the commitment of those involved, if not by its results. The central idea rested on Gastev's conception of man as a programmable entity whose movements and thought processes could be optimized. All of this was directed toward ensuring the highest possible productivity of Soviet workers, in line with Taylorist principles of scientific management, which had previously enchanted the American world. Yet Gastev's ambition extended much further. He believed that influence should be exerted not merely on the level of motion, but on the deeper biological stratum, an idea that would later inspire related initiatives. The research he conducted and the findings he produced belonged to the pre-cybernetic modeling in Russia and would go on to influence the development of the first computer workstations. Still, his tireless pioneering did not secure him high state office. Instead, he was swept up in the paranoid delirium of Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin and executed in 1939 in Moscow's suburbs. Building upon these efforts were the writings and reflections of Vladimir Bechterev, who in turn drew upon Durov's accomplishments in animal training. From the perspective of the Russian neurologist, consciousness was merely an epiphenomenon of specific brain functions, a byproduct. Consequently, he considered it fully reasonable to attempt a simulation of consciousness that would demonstrate how the utterance of a word simultaneously emits a thought. His experiments convinced him that such transmission did indeed occur, and that it was possible to mentally influence another person from a distance through a kind of living matter which he associated with electromagnetic waves. Interestingly, Bechterev also met a suspicious end. After reportedly examining Comrade Stalin and likely identifying signs of paranoia, many suspect that he was killed on the orders of the General Secretary of the USSR. In any case, it is clear that disappearance or death at the hands of the Red Mist was no mystery to the inhabitants of the communist utopia. It is also significant that Bechterev collaborated with Durov, who in turn worked with Kaczynski, himself in contact with towering figures such as the aforementioned Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Alexander Romanovich Belyaev, the science fiction author whose novel The Ruler of the World was directly inspired by the very ambition of mental control. In fact, the network of interaction among Russia's brightest minds was deeply interwoven, encompassing a vast portion of the country's scientific, technical, and artistic elite. The ideas that emerged from this exchange, however, were not limited to brainwaves and mind control, but delved further into questions of telepathy and telekinesis. Naturally, not everyone was thrilled by these pursuits. Belyaev's literary work stands as one of the earliest warnings about the nature of such ambitions. Still, we ought to reflect on the origin of this drive for control, which cannot be reduced solely to political or dictatorial motives, at least not when it comes to scientists. Although, of course, in a totalitarian regime, everything eventually becomes subject to the logic of state and ideology. It is entirely possible that a part of the answer lies in a quote that, according to Velminsky, can be found in Belyaev's novel. To paraphrase, The goal is to restructure the minds of Soviet citizens who are not even aware of the hidden folders of their subconscious, where the concentrated power of thought has stored everything terrifying and dangerous to humanity. Sound familiar? Anyone who has encountered the representative of the sea consciousness at the end of Shadow of Chernobyl may recall the calm, aged voice explaining to Strelok the origin of the zone.
Our main goal was to make small adjustments to the noosphere, allowing us to remove things like anger, cruelty, greed, and other negative factors from the planet.
Though the narrative of the game introduces the concept of the noosphere, the underlying ambition is the same: the desire to purge what we recognize as evil or negative from human existence. But with that, we are once again merely scratching the surface. If this ambition arises from a need, then we are left with the deeper question: where does that need come from? Naturally, it is easy to ask any person whether they would like evil to be removed from the world, but even if billions nodded in agreement, and even if such a response felt intuitively right, we would not have learned anything new. To truly illuminate this, we must return to the path of cognition and to what emerges as a product of human consciousness itself. The answer, in truth, lies in reflection, in that which, according to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, one of the founding thinkers behind the concept of the noosphere, makes the human species unique. Reflection can be summarized as follows. We can say with confidence that animals know something, but they do not know that they know. Were it otherwise, we would have noticed systems of ideas and material creations stemming from the conscious accumulation of knowledge and discoveries. In reality, only human consciousness has gained the capacity to observe itself as an object of inquiry. It became aware of potential and continuity, thus opening a door to a dimension of reality that transcends individual existence. In mythological terms, humanity has eaten from the tree of knowledge and came to know good and evil, stepping out of an allegedly blissful unconscious paradise. And it is precisely this reflection that enables a certain rare few among us to, in Noonan's words, know how much they do not know, just as it drives others to contemplate the burden of consciousness and the moral responsibility toward life after becoming aware of the scale of suffering in the world, after becoming aware of their own vulnerability and the horror of unconscious existence in a cruel and unjust world. Seen from this perspective, knowledge and science emerge as weapons in a struggle against Mother Nature, who walks carelessly over ash and bone, both creating and destroying. It is therefore no surprise that many scientists driven by noble and humanistic intentions have been deeply concerned with the fate of the living world and committed to building a future that would relieve it of suffering, fear, disease, death, and destruction. Let us cast light on this through the words of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. In the past, I would look upon imperfect people, the crippled, the unfortunate, the sick, women and children, and think that they had nothing to do with me. I believed, albeit unconsciously, that foolish people made me seem intelligent, that the misfortunes of others highlighted my own happiness, that the weak were merely my competition, and that it was good to be surrounded by weakness, ignorance, slavery, suffering, illness, and so on. All of this made me feel stronger and more noble by comparison. If they were stronger and happier than me, I would be their servant. We never openly admit such thoughts, but they exist, at least partially. Now that I have come to understand that all the perfection of the world, all its vices and evils will one day become my own fate, I look upon the surrounding imperfection with horror. Their destiny is my destiny after death. I no longer find people amusing. There is no longer that hidden malice or hypocritical pity in me, only horror. Horror and concern. How can we rid the earth of all that is evil, miserable, wretched, of all suffering and all poverty? Only then will I no longer fear being born as a tormented animal, tortured to death, as a man of a degraded race, as a sick person, a cripple, an idiot. This is the concern that is the goal of life, to eliminate every evil on earth. This is no longer sentimentalism or charity to me, but an egoistic imperative which I strive to realize with all my strength. Reason, science, and egoism compel me to strive toward sanctity in the highest sense of that word. Without it, I am miserable, afraid that I may be reborn as some suffering, unconscious creature. These concerns stem from a particular worldview developed by Tsiolkovsky, one that envisions life as a cyclical process, a continual return to existence through the union and separation of atoms. Sensitivity, as an inherent property of every cosmic particle, transforms into sentience once it enters a living being. Not merely reactivity to the external environment, but the capacity to experience pleasure and pain. Beneath this idea lies the conviction that the entire universe is alive, though only higher animals are capable of expressing true emotional depth. It is precisely for this reason that the atoms from which we are made, after our death, enter a dormant state, one of sensitivity without awareness, only to inevitably reawaken into feeling as they recombine and separate through natural process. If the conditions are right, any matter may become organic, therefore all inorganic matter is potentially alive. The resulting idea of this view is panpsychism. Let us return now to the cruelty of nature, a notion that tormented Teilhard de Chardin just as deeply. Earlier we mentioned the blind groping in the dark, that is, life's struggle to carve a path forward through endless trial and error, creating and destroying without concern for the individual being. As stated before, the individual is nothing more than a thrown bolt, a disposable probe in life's search for passage. Even the feeling of uniqueness or heroism is simply a motivating illusion designed to push the organism further along the path of exploration. Mother Nature walks blindfolded, heedlessly trampling over the dust of crushed lives. Paradoxically, for life to exist, life must perish. On the other hand, another process that characterizes this struggle is the joining of living particles, through which they enter a state of partial enslavement, becoming links in a chain stretching across time and space. Yet, with the emergence of spirit comes a change in perception. The world's indifference towards its elements is transformed into deep concern. This concern becomes conscious, awakened within the realm of the person. Thus, the previously mentioned reflection gives rise to concern, and concern gives birth to the desire for liberation from this brutal order. From an awareness of the fate of living beings and the doom brought on by pack, tribal or factional divisions in which individuality is lost, emerges the intent to seize control and overcome suffering. Yet the knowledge of good and evil, even if we treat them as absolutes and assume that humanity is capable of discerning them with precision, does not carry with it the knowledge of the right path. That's why we say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And still, the desire for righteousness burns the soul unbearably. But unlike the blind woman who over long ages creates and destroys at random, yet through the sheer number of attempts yields some vaguely positive results, man creates and destroys deliberately within a much shorter span of time. And it is precisely this deliberateness that stems from our limited, however dazzling intellect, from our fractured perspective and our always questionable morality without the luxury of repeated experiments. Now imagine how much more complex all this becomes once we factor in power, authority, ideology, and paranoia. So let us return to Velmitsky. Although engineers, radio technicians, and psychologists conducted research that allegedly confirmed the electromagnetic emission of thoughts, statistical verification casted serious doubt on these conclusions. With Stalin's rise to the position of General Secretary and the development of his personality cult, the visionary enlightenment or technicist character of such research was gradually abandoned. The leader became the living embodiment of the omnipotent and omnipresent state apparatus, whether in the material or immaterial realm. To illustrate this, Velmitsky refers to the 1950 film The Fall of Berlin, specifically a scene in which Soviet generals discuss the assault on the German capital. Red lines, symbolic representations of different divisions, stream toward and merge into a single black point, Berlin. The framing emphasizes the beauty of this coordination before the camera passes without a cut through a wall, transporting viewers to a new setting, the Yalta Conference. There, the General Secretary lays out a precise military strategy, while Allied leaders and officers listen attentively. There are no intermediaries between the leader and the front. The Soviet society is united, without wires, without devices, all think as one, all of them knowing everything. With the persistence of the cult even after Stalin's death, this ideal, now embodied by his image, became the immortal force of an imagined, tightly interconnected society whose members have nothing to hide from one another. Of course, we know today that the technical solutions, research results, and theoretical reflections of these individuals ultimately proved flawed. And while from the vantage point of historical distance we may scoff at ideas that now seem absurd, it becomes evident just how artistically potent these same ideas are when used to portray the inherent evil of such undertakings and of communism more broadly, especially given the other revolutionary activities that were far from laughable. Thus, in Stalker, we are presented with the great monolith and its fearless warriors, a collective without intermediaries. The leader directly caresses their thoughts, offers comfort and meaning, and in return receives total submission and the synchronized response of individual bodies operating under the command of a collective mind. Behind it all, we see scientists driven by good intentions. In this way, consciousness and mind, once seen by thinkers, scientists as intrinsic value, become enslaved in the supposed process of evolution toward an ultimate intelligence, and in that slavery they rot to the point where liberation from control brings not joy or purpose to most of them, but sorrow, tears, depression, and suicidality. That is why the cries of the monolith warriors with which we opened this chapter are so painful, and that is why when we loot their corpses in Call of Pripyat, after the monolith has fallen, we find bottles of vodka they never drank in shadow of Chernobyl, back when they still heard the voice of their master.